The ever-repeating time loop is a trope that has been present in the entertainment industry for decades. Despite making small appearances in a few foreign films over the years, it wasn't until 1993's Groundhog Day that the concept became well known across the globe. And since Groundhog Day, most movies that make use of the gimmick in recent years follow the same formula. That in the time loop being some mysterious anomaly designed to force the participant to acknowledge their wrongdoings and misdeeds, which usually ends up making them a better person by the end. It's an intriguing idea that can give you the creative freedom to explore feelings like grief in a new and interesting way. So I can remember being pretty excited by the reveal of 12 Minutes back in E3 of 2019, an interactive thriller about a man stuck in a time loop experienced through an overhead point-and-click perspective. Hype gradually began to build for me when I saw the cast involved. Having A-list stars like James McAvoy and Willem Dafoe in your interactive thriller really gives it a sense of credence that most other titles do not have. However, after E3, I kind of forgot about it. 3 years passed me by before I even thought of the game again, at which point I found it on Steam for a relatively low price. I finished the whole thing in about 3 to 4 hours and found myself disappointed. Despite the intriguing premise, the game didn't really explore anything new or all that profound in its runtime. I'm not really going to be able to expand on that without getting into plot details, so from here on out there will be spoilers. Let's talk about 12 Minutes. The game begins with our protagonist arriving home after a day at work where he's greeted by his loving wife who has prepared dinner for him. Whilst the two talk over dessert, she tells him that she's pregnant and shows him a set of baby clothes with the name Dahlia on them, his mother's name. After saying that she wants to name the baby after his mother, they both hear a knock at the door. Your wife answers and is greeted by a man claiming to be police. He proceeds to tie both of your hands behind your backs with zip ties and accuses your wife of murdering her father while demanding to know where the watch is. Your wife says she doesn't know what he's talking about, so he begins to strangle us to try and get her to talk. We eventually suffocate and are pulled back to when we first entered the apartment. This is the foundation of the time loop that we find ourselves stuck in. We arrive at home, greeted by the wife. After 10 minutes or so, the cop arrives and murders you. The loop resets when you die, if you try to leave the apartment, or after 12 minutes pass. It's actually quite engaging at first. You want to explore the 3 rooms available to you and examine all the items that you can to look for clues or anything that can help you. The home invasion is quite harrowing, and you find yourself growing increasingly afraid of the intruder. But I don't think that the game manages to sustain its initial intrigue. If anything, it actually seems to buckle under the weight of its own premise. For the first few loops, it's not too bad, as you still have a lot of information to unearth. After speaking to your wife, you'll try to stop the intruder from breaking into the apartment. You can ask her to lock the door and not to answer it, which, after some insistence, she agrees to. However, the cop will just kick the door down, and the scene plays out in the same way. During one loop, I made sure to pick up the kitchen knife from the counter and tried to cut the zip ties during the invasion sequence. After watching me do this, he kicked me back down and killed me again. The next time, I tried to wait until he walked into a different room before cutting the bonds so that he couldn't see me try and escape. The problem came when he never did leave the room, so he killed me again. The time after that, I tried to use the kitchen knife on the cop instead, hoping to incapacitate him. Despite being unarmed, he managed to overpower me and kill me again. I noticed sleeping pills in the bathroom cabinet and thought I'd be able to mix them with water and that maybe after tying both of us up, the cop would take a sip and pass out. He never does. I tried hiding in another room as the wife answered the door, hoping to get the jump on the cop, but she ratted me out by calling for help. The novelty of the time loop inevitably fizzles away after the first few run-throughs as you realise just how limited you are in your options. I tried to think outside the box, but rather disappointingly, there only seems to be one solution to a lot of these puzzles. The next thing I did to progress the plot was to hide inside the closet as soon as the loop started, so that when the wife left the bathroom, she didn't realise I was home. Once the cop arrives, the whole thing plays out as usual, but now she doesn't call out for us since she doesn't know we're here. After being interrogated, she tells the cop that he can find the watch in the vent underneath the medicine cabinet, which he proceeds to grab. He shoots your wife in the head and sets up the scene to look like a suicide. Now, after starting a new loop, you can go into the bathroom and grab the watch for yourself. If you confront your wife with it, then she'll tell you about her father and how she came into possession of the watch. She mentions that her father was having an affair with her nanny when she was a child, and so her relationship with him was always a little rocky. One day he caught her sneaking out and got violent with her, resulting in her shooting him in self-defense. Unfortunately, despite having this new information, there's not much that we can really do with it because the cop always gets in the way. If we try to run away from the apartment before he arrives, the loop restarts. If we try to explain the situation to him or give him the watch, he doesn't listen and kills the both of us. We need to understand his motivations in order to stop him from attacking us. Once again, I mixed the sleeping pills with the water, but this time I offered it to the wife. After a little while, she goes into the bedroom to lie down and soon falls asleep. I hid in the closet a second time, so when the cop arrives and nobody answers the door, he forces his way inside. He notices the wife lying on the bed and goes to investigate by turning on the light switch. However, back in the first loop, the wife mentions that the switch is dangerous and needs replacing, so when the cop tries to turn it on, he electrocutes himself and is rendered unconscious. Now we can search his pockets and take his phone and tie him up with his own zip ties. By checking his phone, we discover some messages from his daughter, Bumblebee, who is going through treatment for cancer. After he wakes up, we try questioning the cop, but he refuses to answer any of our questions. In a rather disturbing series of events, we have to slowly stab him with the knife before he starts to talk. He explains that the wife's father survived getting shot, but she came back and killed him sometime later. Also, he came for the father's watch as it happens to be quite valuable and can pay for Bumblebee's treatment. The cop eventually bleeds out, and with nothing left to go on, we start the loop again. After investigating the fridge, we find a Polaroid with the wife at a party on the supposed date of her father's murder. We use the wife's phone to call Bumblebee and claim that the cop doesn't know the full story. We plead with her to ask him to listen to us and let us share our side of the tale. After we explain all of this to the cop, he apologizes for what he was going to do and reveals that when he found the father dying, his last words were monster. It comes to light that Monster was the name that the wife's mother gave to the illegitimate child of the father after he slept with the nanny. The three of them deduce that after the father survived getting shot by the wife, the son came back and finished the job. The cop says that he'll start looking for the son, and your wife finally seems free. However, as the couple are about to embrace each other, the loop resets again. This time around, we ask the cop about the nanny, and he says that her name was something flowery, something beginning with the letter D. After handing over the baby clothes from the start, he confirms that her name was Dahlia. And this is the big reveal. The nanny that your father-in-law cheated on his wife with is actually your mother, making your wife your sister. The very last section of the game puts you in a room with your father where he tells you that the feelings you have for your sister aren't natural and that you have to leave her. While initially hesitant, you eventually agree to leave and never tell your wife/sister why. Nothing in the game up to this point has been real. The whole scenario of you and your wife living at home and getting your home invaded by a cop was essentially a mind palace that you created to help you deal with the emotional trauma. The whole time, you're having a conversation with your dad, and you're off in Fantasyland. Now, if you like this reveal, then good for you, I'm happy for you. But I guess the issue that I have with it is that it just doesn't really have a point. It seems to exist purely for the sake of having a twist, and to give the game a talking point, which clearly works since I'm talking about it now. For me, it comes across as an attempt to invoke pure shock value and doesn't really back it up with anything substantially profound or interesting. Like I mentioned earlier, when a time loop is used in most stories, there's usually a reason for it. Most commonly, the protagonist has to overcome an obstacle or make changes to themselves in order to escape the loop. In Groundhog Day, Phil Connors had to become a much better person before he could move on with his life and escape the loop. What I struggle with when it comes to 12 minutes is that it doesn't seem to represent anything. What's the point? What's the message? Incest is bad? Well, the game never actually criticizes the protagonist for it. He just kind of makes the decision to leave. I'm sure people will argue that he had to come clean to his wife and leave her to live her life, that his lesson was to learn that he can't keep pretty important information from her for the sake of his own happiness. But remember that none of this is real. He never actually lied to her or kept anything from her. They didn't actually spend 8 years living a lie together. This was all in his head. It's literally the cliche of, it was all just a dream. It seems a little wasted potential to pump millions of dollars into developing a game with a star-studded cast, give it a Hitchcockian poster, and in the end, have it boil down to a conclusion that most 12-year-olds use when writing a story in English class. It's not a good reveal because not only does it have little to no effect on the protagonist, but it's totally contrived and isn't even foreshadowed throughout the story. The reason that people love twist endings is that it recontextualizes the story you've been a part of this whole time. It gives you something to look out for next time. If you're watching Shutter Island or The Sixth Sense, when you know the twist, it actually makes that second viewing so much more entertaining. You're looking for these little clues and nods to the ending, and it makes you feel stupid for not noticing the first time. 12 Minutes doesn't have any of that. Nothing in the story points towards the reveal, it's just an old-fashioned rug pull. You'd think that with the knowledge of the couple being siblings, there would be fun references on a second playthrough, but there really isn't. You could have a reference to how the two maybe look similar, or have more dialogue options that hint towards it. I'd even accept it if some of the posters they have on the walls were references to stories with similar themes, but no. The only thing that comes to mind is the wife randomly coming out of the blue stating she wants to name the baby after your mother that you never knew. People don't talk like this, it's just really awkward. If I'm being generous, then I could say that maybe since the hallway shares the same carpet as the Overlook Hotel from The Shining, that could be a reference to how this is all in the protagonist's mind, just as the ghosts in the hotel are in Jack Torrance's mind. But that doesn't even work really, since the point of The Shining was to be ambiguous as to whether or not that was all in his head, or if the hotel was really haunted. That just muddies the thematics of this story. It's frustrating because the game would have already had a conclusive ending, with the truth being revealed that the wife didn't really kill her father, and that it was just some mysterious half-brother that she never knew about. You could argue that despite playing as the husband, the wife was actually the protagonist of the story. She spent so much time trying to process the guilt she felt for killing her father, and having the truth come out lifts a weight off of her shoulders. The themes of toxic masculinity from her father's abuse are mirrored in the way that, to progress the game, you literally have to drug your wife and watch her be murdered in front of your eyes. Or maybe I'm just grasping at straws and trying to give the game too much credit. So the functionality of the time loop itself is another one of the game's missteps. I've touched on some of this already, but the most frustrating part of gameplay is that you just don't have the creative freedom to come up with unique solutions to the puzzles. If you take a game like Scribblenauts or even Portal, there is no one definitive way to solve the puzzle. There's a general ballpark concept that you need to wrap your head around, but the way you actually go about it is mostly up to you. That makes a really satisfying gameplay loop, because you don't feel like you found the answer that the game was looking for, you feel like you've overcome an obstacle. When games do it really well, you're not quite sure if what you did to progress was the intended way or not. In order to make it to the credits of 12 minutes, you have to spike your wife with the sleeping pills. If that was one way to go around incapacitating the cop, then I think it'd be fine, but the fact that you have to do this just really doesn't sit right with me. You have to hide in the closet as your wife gets murdered so that you can learn some information. It's quite frustrating as the things that you would try to do in real life don't work, just because. Why can't you attack the cop from behind with the knife? If you try to attack him head on, he always gets the better of you, but if you sneak up on someone from behind with a knife, you should always come out of that fight the winner. You should be able to hide in the closet like you already have, but when the cop starts to tie your wife up, you can jump out and club him over the head with something to knock him out. This would let you bypass having to watch your wife get murdered in cold blood, provide another way to incapacitate the cop, and provide a rare scenario where you can question him whilst your wife is conscious. In real life, I think I'd say to my wife, tell me something only you would know, so when the loop restarts, I can tell you and fast forward having to prove to you that I'm stuck in a time loop. But you can't. Every time you have to go through the same rigmarole of showing the watch or the Polaroid and explaining about the man that's going to knock on the door. The concept of being limited to 12 minutes is intriguing, but I don't think it plays all that well. It could be a really interesting novel or a short film, but as a video game, I just don't think it works. If you think back to those old LucasArts point-and-click games from the 90s, there were some really obtuse puzzles in there. The kind of random things that nobody figured out on their own and had to discover through word of mouth or maybe a magazine. But the benefit that those games had was time. You can take as much time as you like and spend ages mulling over a puzzle before finding the solution. The issue with 12 minutes is that you're artificially restricted to that small window of time to do what you need. Say for example you're in the end game and want to hand the baby clothes to the cop, but you don't pick them up beforehand. You'll rush to the bedroom to grab them from the drawer. This setback costs you 30 seconds, and now while you're going through the dialogue tree, 12 minutes strikes. You're set back to the start again. Sure, what you have to redo isn't really difficult, but it is awfully tedious. Because of this minor setback, you now have to wait for the wife to leave the bathroom, go inside and open the vent with your keys, grab the watch, take it to her, explain that you know what happened to her father and sit through that entire conversation, grab the Polaroid from the fridge and hand it over to her because the cop won't accept it if it comes from you, go into the closet, grab the phone, call Bumblebee and sit through that conversation, now go into the bedroom, grab the clothes that you forgot last time, wait with your wife for the cop to arrive, wait for his dialogue on the phone to finish, go through the whole spiel explaining everything to him again, and now we're back where we were. At the beginning, the limit on the time loop provides a neat sense of tension to proceedings. After an hour or so, it just becomes tiresome. You feel like you don't have enough time to experiment with different items or dialogue choices because the thought of having to redo everything up to where you are is just too discouraging. By the time you reach the end game and know how to move the plot where it needs to go, you actually find the first 10 minutes of the loop to be a chore, which I doubt was the intention. So overall, I was ultimately disappointed with how this game turned out. It is an interesting concept, and the story did have potential to be quite engaging, but I can't wholeheartedly recommend anyone buying this thing. If you already pay for Xbox Game Pass, then sure, I'd suggest giving it a go for the novelty of it, but I wouldn't actually splash any money on the thing unless it was really cheap on a Steam sale or something. Even the voice talents of these three didn't do much to save it for me. James McAvoy and Daisy Ridley are doing American accents, and to be honest, if it wasn't spread all over the marketing, I wouldn't have known. And I don't mean that in a, oh aren't they so good, they're blending in like a chameleon sort of way. I mean, like, Daisy Ridley doing an American accent sounds like your average run-of-the-mill voice actor kind of way, which just begs the question, why did they spend so much money on this thing? I think Willem Dafoe is by far the best of the three, but even he couldn't raise it any higher than it actually belongs to me. I suppose what I'm trying to say is that if you want to play a short little indie game with some cool quirks and interesting ideas, you can do so much better with your time. And that's it, so thank you all very much for watching. I do hope you enjoyed this video. I do have another video in the works that's either going to come out towards the end of the year or maybe early next year, but that's going to be something a bit different. I'm looking to do a video on film as opposed to games, so I think that will be something new and interesting for me to try working on. But other than that, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. See ya.